أهلا بكم في حلقة جديدة من بودكاست واشنطن. الوضع بين واشنطن وطهران لا يزال متأزما إلى غاية الآن. زيارة الرئيس دونالد ترامب إلى بكين لم تؤتي أكلها، وبالنتيجة الجميع يترقب ما سوف يحدث في الأيام القادمة. التصعيد مستمر بين الجانبين، ومضيق هرمز لا يزال مغلقا بالملاحة. للبحث أكثر في هذا الموضوع وما ستؤول إليه الأمور، يسعدنا أن نستضيف الدكتورة دانيال عريسي، الباحثة الأولى في معهد نيو لاين للدراسات الاستراتيجية والأستاذة في جامعة جورج واشنطن. أهلا دكتورة.
Thank you so much for having me today.
دكتورة، ترامب ذهب إلى بكين وعاد، والآن الجميع يترقب ساعة الصفر إن كانت قتالية أو دبلوماسية. ما هو المتوقع والقادم في الأيام القادمة حول ما يترتب عليه الوضع بين واشنطن وطهران؟
I think looking at the latest response of Iran on on the offer and the United States response to the offer of Iranian offer, it looks like negotiation and diplomacy is failing. And to produce any meaningful result to end this war. I think diplomacy, because to be very honest, trust has also declined significantly between both partners. So to give you a short answer to that question is, diplomacy is less likely to bring an end to this war. And from all the sources and from all the statements that's being made by the president and his close allies and responsibles and officials, military operation would likely be the last resort that the current administration will resume. We can discuss in details what kind of targets this current administration might resume or discuss, but diplomacy is less likely to bring a result, especially after 3 different rounds of negotiations and meetings that has already took place. The war is likely to resume and the military operation is likely to resume. There are so many reasons that explain such a failure in diplomacy to reach its goal, but the escalation is likely to increase between these two countries, and it gets much more complicated when we think about the Gulf countries, how they might be getting affected again. When we think about Iraq, Lebanon, that's much more complicated questions to discuss.
يعني رئيس دونالد ترامب دائما ما يتحدث عن أن موضوع الملف النووي خط أحمر، وبأن على الإيرانيين تسليم ما يملكون من يورانيوم مخصب، وبأن هذا الموضوع غير قابل للنقاش. ألا يزال الإيرانيون يصرون إلى هذه اللحظة على إهمال هذا في كل البنود التي يبعثوها؟ إلى أي مدى ممكن أن يصبر ترامب على إيران في هذا الموضوع بالذات؟ قبل أن نتطرق إلى باقي المواضيع، إلى مواضيع أذر إيران، إلى مواضيع الصواريخ البالستية، الموضوع الأساسي التي شنت من أجلها الحرب هو موضوع الملف النووي، ولا تزال إيران لغاية اليوم تبتعد تماما في كل ورقة تقدمها عن هذا الملف. إلى أي مدى ممكن أن يصبر عليهم ترامب؟
Yeah, so the war between the United States and Iran started over the nuclear weapons and the nuclear file and the ballistic missiles. Right now, the war is no longer about that. It's about also the Strait of Hormuz, about resuming the operations of the Strait of Hormuz. And I think one of the main reasons diplomacy is failing is because there is also an unclear leadership in Iran. There is division in Iran in the leadership. And this is something has been very clear throughout how the Iranians are responding and interacting with the current administration. From one side, you hear that the Iranians will agree to transfer all their enriched uranium to the United States. And then a few weeks later, you see a change in the position and a change in the opinion. And this reflects that the current leadership is not consistent. There's no clear leadership on the vision and the values and how they actually want to react to this nuclear programs. And this is reflecting on the current war. And the administration has been clear since day one that Iran cannot have the right to nuclear weapons and to nuclear facilities or operations. And then the Iranians have not been clear on where they actually stand on this question. I think this is very complicated. And this is really the core issue here. It has complicated any way to end the conflict. And that's because there is a change in the leadership. right? The current administration has targeted, and Israel as well has targeted the key leadership in Iran, and that made it very difficult to have a consistency or a unified decision-making power in Iran. And so this is it's one of the main factors here, and I think the last offer or the last response from Iran to the United States has been very clear that Iran is unwilling to change their assumptions on they have the right to own nuclear weapons. They're not gonna come to the table and offer any concessions on these rights. And this is the United States is unable to accept that. I think the United States wanna reach a deal that is better than, or at least better than the GCOP1 that was under Obama administration. I think this is something that the current administration want to reach, but the problem is it's hard. The Iranians it's hard to reach the deal because we're dealing with a very ideologically, fundamentally and radical individuals in Iran that are unwilling to compromise or to have a moderation in their mindset. And so this is make it very, very difficult because it's not only a military, it's also ideologically driven system.
يعني وهنا تحديدا أسأل بهذه النقطة، يعني الرئيس دونالد ترامب كان واضحا منذ البداية والشروط التي وضعها واضحة، لكن لغاية اليوم ولغاية الآن إيران تتحدث بلغة المنتصر، وكأنما القيادات في إيران تشعر أو تسوق على أنها المنتصرة في الحرب التي مضت في 2025 وفي حتى في هذه المعركة، وتسوق وتضع شروطها. يعني هل كل ذلك بسبب يعني محاصرتهم لمضيق هرمز ويعني كسبهم هذه النقطة بالتحديد؟
So Iran is in a very tough position right now. It's important to think about this element. I think when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, the United States is not a priority for the United States, the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a priority for Iran. Already the United States is exploring alternative options than the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran, as a dictatorship, as a non-democratic, autocratic country, they have to appeal for their leadership. And they have to say to their military and to their institutions that we are winning and we are continuing this war because that's the only remaining institutions through which the regime is sustained. So they have to appeal to the psychology of their people and to have to win the psychology of their military personnel, the soldiers, the people who is getting the orders and the commands, because this is the only remaining element for the regime before it collapses. So especially because the Iranian economy is devastating. So people were talking in Iran that why don't we have a separations in the military institutions between the government and Iran? Well, this is because, especially that the economy is in a very terrible conditions. Well, because the regimes has been playing on the element of psychology here. That's one element. It's like to win the support of the people. In fact, I do want to discuss something very important here. When we talk about economic war, the United States is winning the war in Iran from an economic standpoint. The United States, the naval blockade that they did, it hurt the economy of Iran. And in Iran, the first important condition Iran is putting it on the table is resuming the operation of the Strait of Hormuz, because that's the major source of income for the country. So if the Strait of Hormuz is not open, the country is on the edge of ending, and the whole regime will collapse. So this is the main element. Iran is saying that we are winning the war, or we are succeeding in this war, because from one perspective they want to secure support, the popular support or the mass support for them, especially from the soldiers and the personnel and the security, the people who are actually receiving the orders, but also they want to protect what is left from their reputation on the international community. But in fact, Iran is in a very devastating economic conditions. Again, one of the most important elements they're putting it on any table, on any negotiations, is resuming the Strait of Hormuz and resuming and removing the sanctions. That's how desperate they are economically for money and resources after what the United States did with the Strait of Hormuz and with the imposing sanctions on them.
يعني ولكن هنالك بعض الديمقراطيين، هنا نتحدث عن الداخل الأمريكي، يقولون بأن هرمز كان مفتوحا بالأساس قبل الحرب. لو لم يأتي ترامب على هذه المعركة لما حدث ما حدث، يعني ولم يكن هذا يعني مفتاح أو سلاح جديد بيد إيران، وإنما ترامب أعطاهم هذا المفتاح أو هذا السلاح بعد الحرب. يعني كان هرمز مفتوح وكانت الملاحة تمر بشكل سلس. فما الذي حدث؟ يعني هل هو إخفاق من الإدارة الأمريكية، أم أن الإيرانيين اكتشفوا ذلك مؤخرا واكتشفوا أن لديهم يعني سلاح مخفي هو سلاح هرمز؟
The United States, when they engage in this military operation, they did not expect that the operation is going to take 4, 5, 6 months right now. It's not. This was not an expectations. I think the expectations of the U.S. administration is that this war will be done in a few weeks or maybe 2 or 3 months. So this is something the United States did not expect, and of course the Iranians took leverage of it and wanted to close the Strait of Hormuz and hurt the the American economy. But on the other hand, I think this is something that we have to talk about it. This is maybe a miscalculations on our end from a foreign policy perspective. But on the other hand, it's also to discuss how the United States was also intelligence, I would say, or like smart in foreign policy in implementing the naval blockade, in pushing the Iranian economy and pressuring them to push the economy, to hurt the economy and hurt the regime. And this is something we've seen. The United States is also discussing again, resuming how the ships are being in the markets in the sea, resuming the directions of the ships in the Strait of Hormuz and how they're being conducted there. And so this is to say that the Strait of Hormuz is no longer under the influence of Iran. In fact, the United States is controlling it, and it's showing Iran that you cannot use this element to push me in the corner, if I want to say. So this is a success for the foreign policy of the United States, that we are able to control such an important element. But on the other hand, I do want to talk about the United States relationship with the Gulf countries that is being hurt because of the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe the United States is controlling the Strait of Hormuz right now. Maybe we are in charge of it in terms of the naval blockade that we have. But on the other hand, we have a critical relationships because of that military operations with our very close allies, the Gulf countries. The fact that UAE decided to leave the OPEC and not joining the OPEC so they can have a freedom in the productions of oils and gas, that tells that there is some sensitivity or tension in the relationship between both countries.
وبالتحديد أيضا يعني نركز على هذه النقطة، موضوع دول الخليج. يعني ألا تخشى الولايات المتحدة، وخاصة وإحنا رأينا في الحرب بأنها عندما قامت بعمليات عسكرية ضد إيران سارعت إيران بضرب مصالح الولايات المتحدة داخل دول الخليج، وحتى ضربت دول الخليج نفسها التي كانت تدعو للسلام. ألا تخشى اليوم الولايات المتحدة ورئيس دونالد ترامب من إعادة هذا السيناريو في حال التفكير في مهاجمة إيران من جديد؟ وهذه المرة ستكون بالطبع أقسى، لأن الولايات المتحدة تحدثت عن ضربات لمنشآت حيوية وجسور، وهذا يعني قد تستهدف إيران بالمقابل منشآت حيوية ومصادر للطاقة والمياه في دول الخليج. ألا يتم بحث هذا الموضوع هنا في واشنطن؟
That's a very valid question. That's a very important element to think about it. I think that the current administration is aware of this, but there is a shift in the position of the Gulf countries toward the conflict in Iran. At the beginning of the war, the Gulf countries were unhappy, I would say, with the current administration decision to engage in the war. However, we've seen that the Gulf countries are right now kind of in a different position. They're welcoming a joint operation or joint corporations against Iran altogether if the UAE or if any of other countries got attacked. So this is a success. This is something the administration was not expecting, but that's a success to get more allies who are willing to attack or, again, at least make a statement against Iran. This is something we've never seen from the Gulf countries. I remember very well before the current administration launched the first missile against Iran, there was a meeting at the White House between the President Trump, the intelligence officer from Saudi Arabia, and Israel. They met at the White House trying to convince, and the Saudis trying to convince the current administration that maybe diplomacy should be an option on the table instead of military. The Gulf countries never wanted this war to start, but once they got involved in it, they are taking a very serious, a brave position toward Iran, and that's a success. That it's not only the United States fighting this country, but also other countries are fighting this country, because again, they know very well that they have suffered tremendously from the non-state actors that were financially built and supported by Iran and distributed across the whole Gulf countries, from Lebanon to to Saudi Arabia and the drugs and the Captagon to Iraq and other countries. So this is an opportunity for the Gulf countries to unite together against Iran and what's going on in Iran. Definitely there are short-term costs of these operations, such as the prices of the oil and gas and tourism and investments in the UAE particularly. But it's time to have a unified effort against Iran. And this is something the Saudi Arabia has made a couple of statements supporting UAE and others' effort to protect the Gulf countries from these massive attacks from Iran against the Gulf countries. And to be very honest and frankly, I think this is a very mistake Iranians are doing by attacking the Gulf countries, because the Gulf countries are the only available allies that could stand and protect the Iranians. And so attacking them, meaning leaving nobody in the room to actually stand with you and support you. And so this is a mistake by the Iranian policymakers to attack their Gulf countries. Saudi Arabia and Iran had a very good relationship before the start of that war, that they could have used this relationship, Iran, to convince the current administration to avoid this military operations or go back to the negotiation table. But now they lost any possible allies for them in the region.
اليوم وبعدما حدث من الحرب والضربات الإيرانية، وأيضا يعني في كل يوم خلال حتى فترة الهدنة رأينا الإمارات تقصف، رأينا تدخلات إيرانية، حزب الله في الكويت، وهنالك ميليشيات وأذرع وفصائل مسلحة تتوغل داخل دول الخليج تحاول أن تؤذي تلك الدول. وأيضا اليوم كان هنالك خبر قبل قليل يتحدث عن أن مجموعة إيرانية حاولت اختراق أو دخول المياه الإقليمية الكويتية، وبالتالي لا زالت إيران تحاول كل يوم تسعى أن تتدخل في تلك الدول الخليجية. هل تعتقدين بأننا سوف نشهد تدخل عسكري من تلك الدول إذا ما اتفقت مع الولايات المتحدة في المعركة القادمة ضد إيران؟
I do not expect it happening in the next few days, but this is definitely an option on the table. And if it were to happen, I think the Saudi Arabia will be the cheerleader of such an operation. For a different reason, we can talk about it. But Saudi Arabia has the military capabilities and the resources and the intel and the trainings from the United States, the gun and the support. So this is, if a military operation were to happen, I think the Saudi Arabia would be the cheerleader of such an operation. I do expect this operation to take place, but not in the short term. That's an option on the table. The Gulf countries are very hesitant to engage in any military operation. They would rather have a diplomacy or statements or maybe a phone call, but I would not expect them to have a military operation. Surprisingly, also to see how the Iranians are making their decisions. Also, we've seen recently the Iranians had a phone call with the Saudi foreign minister. They were talking about the current situations, and then on the other hand, they're attacking the Gulf countries. So again, this is go back to my original point: is there's no clear consistency in the pattern when it comes to decision making. There is inconsistency about who they're talking to, what is their statement, and what are their decisions, and then it's making it very difficult to understand where Iran stands, because there is lack of clear leadership structure within their system. So I do expect at some point the Gulf countries will have a serious conversations or serious operations, but this is a very much less likely option on the table compared to other options.
البعض يتحدث يعني عن مخاوف خليجية من اتخاذ الرئيس دونالد ترامب لقرار مفاجئ قد يكون بالتوافق مع إيران أو عقد صفقة مع إيران. نعرف أنه رجل صفقات وبإمكانه إمضاء صفقة متى ما أراد يعني، وبعد ذلك سوف يكون وضع دول الخليج في مهب الريح. قد تكون يعني هذه أحد الأسباب بعدم مشاركة تلك الدول في العمليات العسكرية. البعض يقول بأنهم يخشون من أي صفقة قادمة لا تشمل يعني أذرع إيران في المنطقة، ولا تشمل يعني يعني قص تلك الأجنحة، والجميع يخشى، حتى إسرائيل يعني تهدد دائما وتقول بأن على الولايات المتحدة أن تكون لها صفقة حاسمة ليس فقط في الملف النووي وأيضا الصواريخ البالستية وموضوع أذر إيران. وبالتالي الجميع يخشى من موافقة الرئيس دونالد ترامب على صفقة قد تكون يعني بشكل أو بآخر ضعيفة لا تلبي طموحات تلك الدول. عندئذ ما الحل؟ ما الذي سوف يكون يعني في حينها؟
I think it's important to think about any possible deal in relation to every actor. I think when it comes to Israel, the United States is not going to make a deal with Iran without consulting with Israel first. That's their number one priority. I think on Sunday, when the administration received the Iranian response, they immediately the president called the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu. So when it comes to Israel, I don't think there are going to be any deal without passing with Israel first and making sure Israel has its approval. So this is something we're very much positive on it. I think when it comes to the Gulf countries, the first and most important ally that the current administration will definitely take into consideration because they have a strategic interest with is Saudi Arabia. Early this year, Mohammed bin Salman visited the country and met with the president and have agreed on a number of billions of dollars of deals and transactions. And so President Trump is very aware about those important deals and transactions. And so he's not in a position to make a deal with Iran that will jeopardize those massive billions and trillions of deals that will be up in the air. So I think this means the president will take into considerations or will probably engage in some sort of conversations, maybe not directly on the media, but like one-on-one kind of conversations with key leaders of the Gulf countries to secure their input on these deals, especially that there's already ongoing conversations with them, with all of those Gulf countries. President Trump, his major concerns has been to work with the Gulf countries on these operations. So I'm very much less susceptible that the president will go into a deal without including the Gulf countries in it because, as you mentioned at the beginning, he's a person who's really good at making deals and very good at preserving the deals that he makes. So he doesn't want to lose or take risk of Saudi Arabia or UAE pulling out all this investment that has already been done since their last visit to the United States. Not to mention how much we as the United States have invested in these countries, and we have already military bases in these countries. So we cannot be in a position of making deals without really consulting with our allies in the regions. And I think there is always consultations going on with our key allies in the regions when it comes to those elements. I think the most important factor here that we need to talk about it is any deal will definitely help to a certain extent Pakistan. Pakistan would be a very important element here in this conversations, and they will probably benefit from that deal. Currently, Pakistan is negotiating with Iran the shipment of gas through the Strait of Hormuz. So not only the Gulf countries, but I think also Pakistan is a very important element here.
يعني إذا أوجزنا وكنا يعني تحت بند الأوراق التي من ممكن توقيعها في هذا الاتفاق، ما هي أبرز النقاط التي عندها سيوافق جميع الأطراف الأمريكيين والإسرائيليين ودول الخليج، وبالمقابل ما الذي ممكن أن تتنازل وتوافق عليه إيران؟ إذا أوجزنا ووضعنا هذه النقاط في ورقة وعندها سوف يحصل هذا الديل الذي تتحدثين عنه.
Yeah, this is a very important and difficult question, to be honest. I think for the United States, the number one priority that they're not going to make any concessions on it is, first of all, their nuclear capability and ballistic missiles. I think this is number one priority for the United States and for Israel, the closest ally for the United States. United States and Israel is in the Middle East, and they're surrounded by many countries, if not all the countries, attacking Israel. So they cannot be in a situations where Iran is also holding nuclear and ballistic missiles and attacking the country as well. So I think the first important element before anything is Iran agreeing to transfer enriched uranium to the United States or to their allies. And so far, what I've heard is stopping or freezing their nuclear operations and the enrichment. I think this is number one element. I think the second and most important element would be the non-state actors. The existence and the empowerment of non-state actors by Iran in the region, from Hezbollah to the Houthis to the militias in Iraq. All of these actors have to lose their power and their influence and their resources. And now Hezbollah in Lebanon too, before any deal can take place. place. Because so I spoke about the ballistic missile element. This is very important for Israel, but the non-state actors are a very critical element for the Gulf countries. I've talked about how the Captagon has hurt these economies in the Gulf. I've talked about how these non-state actors will hurt Israel, but this is the most important element. Again, and the third most important element Iran has always been talking about is Lebanon, connecting Lebanon to connecting the ceasefire or the end of the military operations in Iran to the ceasefire in Lebanon. I think United States will not accept that deal anymore, will not accept that Lebanon to be part of the deal. Lebanon is a separate sovereign country and should not be part of this agenda anymore. I think those are the two most important elements here.
دكتورة، سوف نتحدث عن موضوع لبنان وحزب الله بشكل أكثر تفصيلا في الجزء الثاني، لكن دعينا نأخذ فاصل ونعود. فاصل أعزائي المشاهدين ونعود مع بودكاست واشنطن. أهلا بكم مجددا. لا يزال الملف الإيراني يتصدر المشهد ليس فقط في الشرق الأوسط بل حتى في الداخل الأمريكي. هنا في واشنطن كل يوم الصحف والمجلات والتقارير ومعاهد الدراسات تتحدث عن الوضع في إيران، ونحن في بودكاست واشنطن خصصنا حلقات كثيرة عن هذا الموضوع، لكن اليوم نخوض بأكثر تفاصيل عن هذه الحلقة عن هذا الموضوع في الداخل الأمريكي وفي محيط الوطن العربي وأيضا في لبنان والعراق وباقي الدول. يسعدنا أيضا من جديد أن نرحب بك دكتورة، مرحبا مرة ثانية. وقفنا عند حزب الله ولبنان والوضع اللبناني وكيف تأثير إيران على المنطقة وحتى على الداخل اللبناني. اليوم حزب الله مرتبط بإيران بشكل وثيق ويعتبر وجوده الآن جزء لا يتجزأ من معركة ما بين الولايات المتحدة من جهة وما بين إيران من جهة أخرى. الرئيس الأمريكي حاول بشكل أو بآخر عزل لبنان عن معركة إيران، وحاولت دائما إسرائيل فصل المعركة في الجبهة اللبنانية عن الجبهة الإيرانية. لكن لغاية اليوم يعني كيف تقيمين الوضع خاصة مع هذا التصعيد العسكري الحاصل في لبنان؟
That's a very good question. I think let me step back before I assess the situation. Let me talk about Hezbollah. So Hezbollah has lost, first of all, its number one and number two, tier one, tier two, tier leadership. That's a huge, I would say, accomplishment for Israel and for the United States, and a huge relief, to be very honest, for the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government never wanted Hezbollah, never signed up for Hezbollah, and it wasn't imposed terrorist organizations on the Lebanese government. So that's a huge accomplishment and a huge element here to talk about it, that the key leadership is gone. Also, the Lebanese government is trying really to regain its sovereignty and control its borders. And I'm talking here about controlling the territorial borders of Lebanon with Syria to stop the Captagon and drugs from Syria. So this is a huge also achievement for the Lebanese government. This will help undermining and weakening Hezbollah in Lebanon. And also I want to talk about Hezbollah losing popular support for its existence in Lebanon, particularly within the Shia community. And these are all elements that talks about the current military operation that Israel is going through has succeeded to a certain extent in undermining Hezbollah, but also what the Lebanese government is doing, both together, has weakened Hezbollah capabilities and resources and its existence in Lebanon. So together it has undermined to the point where Lebanon, right now, tomorrow and Friday, on Thursday and Friday, Lebanon is engaging for the first time in an actual negotiation on the table with Israel. That's something we never ever thought about it. We never thought that this is going to be happening, even though Hezbollah still exists in Lebanon and still has its own individuals and actors. So this is an example, a signal that Lebanon is different and is separate from the Iranian deal. Lebanon is not related anymore to Iran. And to be honest, we have currently the president of Lebanon, the prime minister of Lebanon are taking very brave decisions, underscoring and emphasizing how Lebanon is separate and it's not connected to what's going on in Iran. But something I do want to mention here about this element is if the United States reach a deal with Iran, this will definitely help assess the sovereignty of Lebanon, will help in Lebanon claiming its sovereignty if we have a deal with Iran. Because, as I mentioned, one of the elements with any deal is going to be a non-state actors, such as Hezbollah. But if there is no deal yet with Iran, Lebanon is going to continue doing what they're doing, which is claiming, again, their sovereignty, their country, their capabilities. And this is something has been very clear. It's not an easy task, to be very honest. The Lebanese government has been attacked by Hezbollah for taking those decisions, for engaging in these conversations. But this is something we have been doing it. And I think the United States is right now pressuring Israel to de-escalate its military operation in Lebanon, to facilitate these negotiations happening tomorrow and Friday in Washington. And I think United States has tried to pressure Israel, but I think the military operation of Israel have succeeded to undermine and to achieve some of its goals in Lebanon at the expense, of course, of a humanitarian disaster and refugee crisis in Lebanon that are paying the price of such a terrorist organization. So this is where we are in terms of the situation. I think also the negotiation between Lebanon and Israel will also help in, discuss those military operations, whether Israel is going to resume or not resume this military operations. But I think something that we need to talk about it is the strengthening and the empowerment of the Lebanese armed forces, part of this entire deal.
يعني قبل أن أغادر ملف حزب الله ولبنان، يعني نعلم بأن حزب الله متغلغل في الحكومة اللبنانية وفي الدولة اللبنانية وفي الاقتصاد اللبناني وفي الأسواق اللبنانية منذ سنوات طوال. هل من السهولة الآن يعني نزع هذا الحزب ويعني سلخه من النظام اللبناني بشكل عام ومن الحكومة، حتى وإن كانت هذه رغبة الشعب اللبناني؟
So one of the main reasons why the 2024-2025 ceasefire failed in Lebanon is because the Lebanese government overpromised what they can do. The Lebanese government overpromised the Americans that we can disarm Hezbollah within 1 year and we can, build a country. This is not realistic because of exactly what you said. Hezbollah is increasingly infiltrating inside the Lebanese government and institutions and society. And disarming Hezbollah is not a simple solution, simple process, right? It requires dismantling its financial infrastructure, its institutions, its a whole capability resources. And I think this is something we realize. This is a mistake on the Lebanese government. Let's be very honest here. We realize, and this is something we're being very honest right now in our current negotiations with the Israelis mediating by the Americans, that disarming Hezbollah is a complex process. We require assistance and resources from the Lebanese government, from the American government, toward the Lebanese armed forces to build the necessary capabilities to be able to defend our territories and our country. We are talking also with the Americans about the need for intelligence and for support from the Americans and the Israelis for need for intelligence, because we do not have this information to actually continue. I think the Lebanese government has done something really, really accomplished something really important here, which is dismantling the financial infrastructure of Hezbollah. The Qard al-Hassan was one of the major important institutions that Hezbollah has been using it to transfer resources, the cash economy kind of money in Hezbollah. This has all destroyed. This has all has been done by the Lebanese government. So this is something we need to highlight, an accomplishment for the Lebanese government, that they are undermining the cash economy of Hezbollah and the cash infrastructure by ending the Qard al-Hassan and other similar financial institutions. There is more to do, there is more to be done, but we have to be realistic on what are the capabilities of the government and what they can and they cannot do. And they are aware right now about this, and they're being very clear in their communication with the Americans and with the Israelis that we have to be realistic in setting our goals and our objectives. I think something that the Lebanese is talking about right now, and it's important, is building the capabilities of the Lebanese armed forces to be in charge of maintaining power and security and rule of law. And this has been very clear with ending the mission of the UNIFIL in the south of Lebanon, because once the UNIFIL leaves this June, the Lebanese armed forces will be in charge and no longer the UNIFIL, which is they proved really inefficient and ineffective.
يعني دكتورة، إذا ذهبنا إلى الشرق قليلا واتجهنا إلى العراق، وهو ملف ليس بعيد عن الملف الإيراني وليس بعيد أيضا عن الملف اللبناني. الملف العراقي لا يزال ملف شائك. لدينا فصائل مسلحة موالية لإيران، لدينا حكومة تشكل جديدة، ولأول مرة رئيس دونالد ترامب يعلن دعمه الواضح للمرشح لرئاسة مجلس الوزراء، وبالتالي نتفاجأ بأن إيران يعني تحاول التدخل بشكل أو بآخر بشكل الحكومة القادمة في العراق، وتضع شروط وكأنها لديها اليد الطولى في العراق. اليوم الولايات المتحدة أيضا لديها أسلحتها، لديها وزارة الخزانة التي تفرض عقوبات على بعض الشخصيات المتصلة بشكل أو بآخر بإيران. ملف العراقي ملف شائك، وجزء لا يتجزأ من الحرب ما بين الولايات المتحدة وما بين إيران منذ زمن بعيد، منذ 2003 حتى قبل الحرب الدائرة الآن. فكيف يمكن أن نتصور شكل الحكومة القادمة العراقية، وكيف يمكن لها أن تتعامل بمثل هذا الضغط الهائل سواء من الجانب الأمريكي أو حتى من الجانب الإيراني؟
That's a very good question. I think when it comes to Iraq, something we need to talk about it is Iraq is facing very serious economic challenges. Iraq has a very high number of youth population, high unemployment, high number of economic growth, a lack of rule of law. You have a lot of non-state actors, a lack of investments and resources there. Those are the best conditions for the rise of non-state actors like Hezbollah. Those are the conditions where youth people will join these non-state actors. In Iraq, you have organizations similar to Hezbollah who are providing resources and support and services for the people in place or instead of the government. So something that we are expecting from the current government to do is to build an inclusive economy. To build like something that the government of Lebanon is right now engaging in. Building a government, building an economy that is not dependent on non-state actors to deliver services and to deliver money and to deliver resources. Instead, the government is the main provider of these services. This essentially will create this independency from non-state actors. You do not need to depend on non-state actors to get a job or to get a money or to get a position. And so building an inclusive government, yesterday I was in a conversations with some senior Iraqi officials inside the Iraqi National Security Council, and they're visiting Washington, D.C., and we've talked about the importance of building an inclusive system of governance where we have a rule of law, we have resources, we have reforms in the economic systems. So these non-state actors do not need to engage, and instead these non-state actors will eventually die slowly and be part of this government. Again, I don't think the current Iraqi government has to engage in force in dismantling and undermining these military operations, this military non-state actors. I think the Iraqi government has to engage in building an inclusive economy where everyone is part of it. They have opportunities and they have resources. And eventually, like what's happening in Lebanon right now, Hezbollah or others in Iraq will eventually die because the funnel of money and resources from Iran is no longer available. Iran is already economically devastating. So they will eventually take their time and die on their own without engaging, actually forcing or use the force to end these non-state actors. So the short answer to that question is building a strong economy to fight these radicalisms or these terrorist ideas and mindset, because those terrorist and radical mindset really are the magnet for Hezbollah and for others actors in the regions. And I'm hearing a lot from senior Iraqis officials here in DC that they're engaging with the current administration on getting resources and support and aid from the current administration toward the Iraqi government to help building a government and institutions and resources that can deliver service to the people and have this rule of law on the entire sovereignty of Iraq.
لكن يعني مع وجود هذه الفصائل الموالية لإيران الآن، يعني إذا ما شنت الولايات المتحدة حربا جديدة على إيران وعادت هذه الفصائل للقتال من جديد كما حدث في المعركة السابقة، سيدخل العراق في أزمة جديدة، وسيكون على رئيس الوزراء الجديد أن يأخذ أحد الجانبين. يعني لا يستطيع الآن الوقوف صامتا. يعني نرى الولايات المتحدة هذه المرة لن تسكت كما حدث في المرة السابقة، وهي تطالب لغاية الآن بأسماء وشخصيات ضربت واستهدفت المنشآت والسفارة الأمريكية والمصالح الأمريكية في العراق، وحتى عرضت مبالغ مالية كبيرة على بعض الأسماء. فبالتالي إن عادت المعركة، يعني الجميع يسأل سواء في العراق أو في الشرق الأوسط، ما هو مصير العراق؟ أيضا هذه الفصائل يعني شنت هجمات على دول الخليج، وبالتالي الوضع يتأزم. يعني حتى الاقتصاد العراقي كما تفضلتي متأزم بنتيجة الأحداث. وعليه ما الحل بالنسبة للحكومة القادمة بما يخص هذا الموضوع تحديدا؟
I think how the government will interact with the non-state actor will depend on the war in Iran. Very much depend on the war in Iran. If the regime in Iran toppled and collapsed, the life of the new government in Iraq is much more easier, definitely. And this is the easier scenario to put in terms of like let these non-state actors die eventually because no more money and no more resources coming their end. If the regime in Iran does not collapse, and if there is an Iranian deal that between Iran and United States will include non-state actors as one of the elements and will require Iran to stop funding these non-state actors, and eventually these non-state actors have to cancel or end their operations and their activities. So this is why a lot of these non-state actors in the regions depend on the deal with Iran and United States. But I think what the Iraqi government has to do right now, until we have informations on how the conflict between the United States and Iran goes, is try to build an inclusive reforms institutions building to undermine the need of the Iraqis to go to these non-state actors. I think the Iraqi government has to work much more with the United States, has to cooperate with the United States in terms of providing information, providing resources. And this is important because I know the Iraqi government has asked the United States for aid and for assistance and for resources. And so if we want to ask for resources and assistance, we need to provide something in return. It's kind of an exchange relationship here. I don't think the United States will engage in any military operation in Iraq. I think the United States are trying to avoid another military operation in Iran. They might engage in it if there is no diplomacy. But I think Iraqi government has to work with the American government, whether providing the names of these people who are responsible of these attacks, providing resources. And this is important if the Iraqi governments want to get resources and aid from the government. They have to cooperate with them in providing all these names, especially if Iran is further weakened. Because these non-state actors cannot hurt the government anymore. They are already, in their desperate situation.
نعم. احنا محور حلقتنا دكتور اليوم هو حول إيران والوضع سواء في المنطقة في الشرق الأوسط أو حتى في واشنطن هنا في العاصمة الأمريكية. دعينا نتحدث قليلا عن ما يدور هنا في واشنطن، الضغوطات الهائلة التي يواجهها الآن الرئيس دونالد ترامب، سواء بارتفاع أسعار الوقود، سواء بالضغوطات داخل الكونغرس من قبل الديمقراطيين أو حتى من قبل جمهور ماغا، وهو الجمهور الداعم لترامب الذي لا يريد حروب طويلة أو جنود على الأرض. كيف يوازن الآن ترامب ما بين كل هذه الضغوطات وأيضا التعنت الإيراني بعدم الرضوخ والموافقة على المفاوضات والشروط الأمريكية؟ كيف يمسك ترامب العصا من الوسط؟ ما هو الحل؟ هل لديه شيء سحري ليرضي الطرفين؟ هذه هي المعضلة الآن، الجميع يسأل عن هذا السؤال.
Yeah, so I think the Trump administration is looking for an exit strategy from the current war in Iran, the simple way to put it, without undermining and hurting their reputation as the current administration, without also hurting and undermining their mass support. Again, I want to go back to my answer. I said it earlier. There was a miscalculation, foreign policy miscalculation in the current administration on how long that war is going to cost and how long that war is going to last. So the cost and the time. And so these two elements put the administration in a situation where they don't know how to actually behave. They don't know what to actually make a decision. It's a very difficult position. On one end, you need an exit strategy. You need to find a way to open the Strait of Hormuz and to end this war because we have a midterm election still coming up very soon in the United States. And we are on the edge, not me, but the Republicans Party are on the edge to lose this election. This is something the Democrats are taking it to their advantage. So we are in a kind of situation. It's a very difficult position. It's a very difficult situation. I think the Trump administration is trying to find an exit strategy for that war. That's why they have engaged if you notice, more than 3 times in a diplomacy with Iran to end this war, because the United States, they want to end this war not from an economic perspective, more than it's for a political perspective or political goals. Iran wants to end the war for an economic reasons. United States wants to end the war for a political reasons. And they both want to end it, but they don't want to end it in a way that hurts their reputation, their administration, their foreign policy. But at the same time, they're both very stubborn actors in their demands and where they stand. And they're unwilling to make concessions. Iran doesn't want to dismantle its nuclear capability. United States is not going to accept Iran having a nuclear power, and yet we are in this situation. So it's definitely a miscalculation on the U.S. foreign policy perspective that it's going to hurt the United States. They're going to hurt the current administration, maybe probably in the upcoming election, and the midterm election, and it's putting the current administration in a very tough position on how to end the war. And it's also, to be honest, hurting our relationship with the European countries. I know we didn't touch about that, but it's also hurting relationship with the European countries about the war. So it's very difficult situations. I'm unsure, to be honest, how the current administration is handling it, because again, they're trying to appeal to multiple different actors, especially in the United States, inside the Congress.
يعني توقفنا عند موضوع الحديث عن الاتحاد الأوروبي وحلف شمال الأطلسي الناتو، ويعني رئيس دونالد ترامب دائما يقول بأنه لا يحتاج إلى تعاون عسكري من هذه الدول، ولكن يحتاج إلى مساندة على الأقل بفتح مضيق هرمز. لكن هذه الدول يوم تقول بأنها سوف تعمل تحالف من 40 دولة وسوف تذهب إلى مضيق هرمز، واليوم الآخر يخرج الرئيس الفرنسي ويقول نحن سوف نتفق مع الإيرانيين لمضي السفن ولن نشارك بأي عملية قتالية أو معركة. يعني ألم يصل الموضوع إلى حافة الهاوية بين ترامب والدول الأوروبية إلى حد أن أحد الدول الأعضاء الأساسية كأمريكا تشارك في معركة والناتو لا يشارك أو حتى لا يساند؟ يعني هذه هي مشكلة حقيقة كبيرة جدا.
I think the European countries do not want to repeat Iraq war, right? When George W. Bush engaged in the Iraq war, it wasn't only the United States. We had a couple of other European countries part of it. And it was a big mistake that United States as well as other countries have acknowledged. And I think this is one element the European countries do not want to repeat, because they're not convinced enough that a military operation is the only way to actually engage with Iran. And they want to go back to diplomacy, and they want to engage in a diplomacy, even though it's hurting their economy right now and diplomacy is not proving effective. So I think this is one element. I think on the other hand, we don't have a clear position, unified position across these economies on how to engage with the United States. France, from one perspective, have said that they want to engage in a unified, bilateral or multilateral kind of relationship with the countries. But we've seen, for example, right now there is a crisis in the UK. That one of the ministers have resigned. So these countries have internal dynamics and internal challenges and domestic challenges. So on one end, they do consider the priority of what's going on in Iran, but it's not their priority for them. The priority for them is their domestic politics. They also do not want to repeat what happened in Iraq. Because also they're worried about their legacy and their image and their reputations to engage in such an operation. And also, to be very honest, they have other priorities going on in Iraq. For example, today the EU have announced that they want to discuss with Taliban the migrant issues with the EU. So they have all their priorities in Iran, and Iran is not their top priority, and they don't want to be put in a situations where the EU have used a military operation again after Iraq, because the only time the EU has actually engaged in a military operation was during Iraq. Any conflict after Iraq, no European countries was part of it. So they don't want to do that again, and they don't want to engage in that again, knowing everything is getting extremely scary and devastating for the region.
ولكن مضيق هرمز دكتورة لم يكن مهما بالنسبة للاقتصاد الأوروبي؟
Yeah, it's very important. It's a very important trade element here, and this is why we've seen the European countries. Some of them are willing to engage with the Trump administration to work with them on the opening the Strait of Hormuz. But I think they do not want to repeat the mistake that happened in Iraq War and the legacy that left on a lot of European countries, and they're hoping to convince the Trump administration that maybe diplomacy should be an option on the table. And again, there's a huge, I would say, division and tension between the current administration and the European countries, and how much we stand by them for a very long time, and they have not kind of shared the cost or the burden of that war. Again, because they have other priorities and they're worried about their reputations being engaged in an aggressive military operation that they never thought that this is the only way to do it.
دكتورة، في سؤال أخير وبجواب مختصر بعد كل ما ناقشناه الآن، ما هو السيناريو المتوقع لنهاية هذه الحرب؟ هل ستكون دبلوماسية أم عسكرية؟
Absolutely. I don't think it's diplomacy. I don't think diplomacy will be the solution for this war. I think the Trump administration very soon will resume military operations against key infrastructure targets in Iran. And this, he already discussed that. He warned about using and bombing infrastructure targets. And then he did not do it. If we remember that night, he did not do it. And so I think the Trump administration will target these infrastructures and will resume the naval blockade and pressuring Iran to make concessions to the table.
دكتورة، شكرا جزيلا لك ولهذه الكمية من المعلومات. حقيقة استمتعنا بالحوار معك ونتمنى أن نلقاك في حلقات قادمة. أعزائي المشاهدين، ننتظر وإياكم ما ستؤول إليه الأمور وما ستحدث من أحداث مع الرئيس دونالد ترامب والجانب الإيراني في الأيام المقبلة. انتظرونا في حلقة جديدة من بودكاست واشنطن. إلى اللقاء.